Hi, welcome to today's episode on Fast Intelligent Care. Today I'll share why I am passionate about pressure care and share a little bit of a personal story. So in 2020 I was working at a very remote or regional hospital in South Africa, very low resourced context, didn't have any specialized equipment, very basic hospital beds, basic mattresses. And I worked with this physio who was also my housemate, also a really close friend of mine. And it was towards the end of 2020 that he actually ended up in a car accident, quite serious, horrific car accident, and actually ended up in ICU. He was in a coma for about a month. Unfortunately, in that time, he did develop a pressure injury. And the pressure injury he developed was actually at the back of his head. So he was essentially intubated, had all these machinery hooked up to him to try and keep him alive. And even though he didn't develop a pressure injury anywhere else, which is quite impressive for someone essentially being bedbound for a whole month, he did develop that pressure injury at his head because there was very limited head repositioning, or probably an area that was a bit overlooked in terms of pressure care. And that's why when I'm doing training, I do want to emphasize that we do want to do a proper skin check on a regular basis with those clients, especially if it's someone that can't tell you that they're in pain. It could be someone that's nonverbal, someone that has limited sensation, someone that's unconscious. And we don't want to just think of those common pressure injury areas like our elbows or tailbone or heels, but we do want to look at places like the back of our head because we have a bony area at the back of our head as well. A very important thing that I want, I guess, to share with this story is that this friend of mine that made that recovery in terms of he had broken ribs, he had a lung punctured, he had cuts on his body. He had fully recovered from that. It wasn't even a year later, he had recovered so much physically that he had come out of the coma. He ended up participating in a half Ironman where he did like basically a triathlon where you're participating in a marathon, you're doing cycling, swimming, and he had physically recovered to the point of being able to participate in that sport, and the rest of his body completely healed, but that pressure injury remained. There is actually studies that they've done on looking at someone's skin structure after a pressure injury, and they have found that the skin structure doesn't fully recover. So once we've actually had a pressure injury, that area will always be vulnerable. So someone that has a history of pressure injuries will always be at a high risk for pressure injuries. So with him, that area the skin was a lot more sensitive to breakdown. So for a while, he was actually struggling with having, he'd wake up and there'd be blood on his pillow because the injury would reopen. So I really want to emphasize that prevention is better than cure with pressure injuries. We don't want to underestimate them, and we do need to know that they can be fatal. When I was working in hospitals as well during COVID, I remember having a client that me and this physio were seeing, and she had so many pressure injuries on her body that there was a point where we didn't even know how to reposition her anymore because she was in so much pain. And unfortunately, she had passed away from sepsis because it was such deep pressure injuries. And if you try to like reposition her onto a different, like let's say she had the pressure injuries was mostly on her back and her buttocks. So we tried to position her in prone, on side lying, and it got to a point where, there'd be pressure injuries everywhere that you wouldn't be able to offload the pressure injury area. So it was a very, very sad scenario for this lady because she couldn't see family during COVID times, but then also being in pain medication not being sufficient, not being able to find a comfortable position. And unfortunately, at that time in South Africa, we didn't have the best pressure distribution mattresses. It was a very rural, a small hospital that had very low resourced context. So it wasn't, an alternating air mattress with a pump and had all these, the bells and whistles. So the thing that we could do was regular repositioning. So whenever I'm talking about pressure management or pressure injury prevention, I always emphasize that once the damage is there, you can't actually reverse stage. You can't get a stage 4 injury to go back to a non-injury or stage 0 or stage 1. You'd always be classified as someone that has a stage 4 injury. So you'd be a stage 4 injury with granulation or with a scar. So important prevention, better than cure. Make sure that when you're educating family members, when you're educating a client, that we know the risks of pressure injuries, that we know where to do our skin checks and to look at all the bony areas, because we are lying on different sides. So we're not just looking at the back, we're looking at shoulders, the hips, the ankles, the heels, the back of the head. All of those are very important things to look at. And then looking at it holistically. We're not just looking at what mattress the person has, we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at are they hydrated, we're looking at are they being repositioned often and correctly. So I guess as a wrap up on today's episode, something that I really want to communicate very clearly is that pressure injuries are preventable. Pressure injuries are very difficult to get rid of once they're there, but they are definitely preventable, which is why it is important that people are educated on this. Pressure injuries are unfortunately a very common hospital-acquired injury, and that is something that is quite a shocking statistic, is that someone can go into hospital not having a pressure injury and come out of hospital having one. And that is because of these clients being very vulnerable to that tissue damage, because they're not moving as often, they're not getting out of bed, their body is already weaker, their skin is not doesn't have as much tolerance, and that pressure injury is just going to make a lot of other things more difficult. So we really do want to emphasize education. We want to make sure that our clients and caregivers understand what causes it, how it's prevented, how to do those skin checks, and making sure that we're not just focusing on products, we're not just focusing on their mattress, we're looking at their repositioning, we're looking at what they're eating, we're making sure that they're getting hydrated. All of those things are going to be important. So I hope these stories have given some insight into how any person can get a pressure injury. It's not just someone that is elderly or has a disability. It could be someone that is young, fit and healthy, and they might just have been unfortunately in one position too long. It could have been that they just went in for surgery, and unfortunately that's not something that was prioritized. So we all need to know about it, we all need to be educated on it, but I do hope that these stories have helped. I would love to hear in the comments if you have a story about someone that has gotten a pressure injury, someone that's healed, someone that has been impacted by pressure injuries, because I think it's important that we understand the impact of it and the importance of pressure injury prevention. Stay tuned for our next episode on pressure injury concepts, understanding the basics with regards to pressure care management.